Welcome to Series 7 of the Lawyers Coach podcast. My name is Oliver Hansard, and each episode of this podcast will feature myself and Claire Rayson, both of us coaches and former lawyers, trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. In this series, we will be hearing from various guests and experts talking about the billable hour. And then, at the end of each episode, we will both be reflecting on what we heard. The Lawyers Coach podcast is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. In this episode, Claire Rayson talks to Richard Burcher, chairman of Validatum and legal pricing expert. Richard believes that being a good lawyer doesn't necessarily mean you're great at pricing. And so getting pricing right in a law firm can be a real transformation exercise. Claire starts by asking Richard how his career got him into legal pricing.
My legal career began in 1980. I spent 30 years of private legal practice in New Zealand, 7 years as a managing partner. But I'd always had an interest in pricing. I was particularly intrigued when I became an equity partner, and I realized that many of my colleagues who were very clever, very able lawyers seemed to have quite variable skills when it came to pricing their work. Some were extraordinarily confident. Others were very timid and diffident, and there was no correlation between their pricing ability and their legal ability. And I thought there's got to be something, there's some secret sauce here. I wish I knew what it was. So I spent a good part of my career studying pricing, both informally and more formally when I went back to university and undertook 2 years master's level postgraduate study on behavioral economics, pricing psychology, and so forth. And I ended up leaving legal practice in 2008 to set up Validatum as a consulting operation, initially working with law firms in Australasia. But then after speaking at a conference in India in 2011, the Commonwealth Law Conference, I was invited by a large London headquartered firm to come over and work with them, which I did for 2.5 months. And it became apparent while we were here that there was actually a massive need. So we took the decision to relocate the business to London, and that has provided a fabulous base since 2012 to internationalise the business and grow it considerably. And at last count, we've worked with over 300 law firms in 25 countries.
Do you tend to work predominantly with lawyers, or are you increasingly working with teams that are focused solely on pricing?
Both. The thing is that a very wide audience in a law firm has an interest in pricing. Quite obviously, there are the fee earners at the coalface, but there is a whole team behind them, from business development, marketing, the analysts, the finance team, and increasingly now pricing professionals and specific dedicated pricing teams and commercial finance directors. So there aren't many people in a law firm that don't have some kind of involvement or contribution to make in the pricing dynamic. So our work tends to be with a very broad constituency. We have specialists who work with the BD people on bids and pitches, a former legal procurement professional. So we go into a firm, we identify what the needs are, and we come up with a customized solution, because many firms have made progress in this space. We find that it's helpful to frame the topic around 4 discrete areas of work: pricing governance, pricing analytics, pricing execution, and pricing technology. And we even have a diagnostic that we can give a firm to answer some questions and score themselves on each of those 4 pillars, which in turn becomes the focal point for the development of whatever it is they need next, because they're all at different stages of that journey.
What would you say are the things that tend to jump out at you as being a kind of a problem area, or an area of, specific need?
If I had to identify one that's common across all firms, although inconsistent from individual partners to individual partners, and that is a lack of pricing confidence. That's a paradox, of course, because the vast majority of lawyers are exceptionally competent and confident when it comes to advocating their clients' interests, but considerably less so frequently when it comes to advancing the firm's commercial interests. And that dichotomy is a huge challenge for lawyers, because if they haven't been trained, if they don't have a broad pricing vocabulary and repertoire and skill set and a confident negotiation base, then it's very much an uneven playing field when they go into the discussions with the clients, which is why they tend to reach for the discount lever, because it's the only thing they can think of when there's a pushback and objection. And so partner confidence, raising partner confidence through skills acquisition, training, and even just an awareness of what the rest of the market is doing all make a big difference.
One of the things that we're going to be talking to all of our guests about this series is the billable hour. And for me, the billable hour can be looked at in two ways. One is the impact that has on the client. And, you know, there are many arguments around the billable hour being something that, you know, is falling out of favor. It doesn't encourage firms to be efficient with their time. And so I want to ask you about that, perhaps in the context of what we've just been talking about and thinking about value in particular, and do lawyers understand value pricing, and is that, you know, lack of understanding perhaps what keeps the billable hour where it is? So we're going to start there, and then the flip is it's an easy metric for firms to measure in terms of internal performance. We'll look at that separately. So my first question is, you know, the billable hour, that lots of people talk ill of it. Do you think it still has a place when it comes to pricing for clients?
Really good question, Claire. And I have to say, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk about this, because it absolutely drives me nuts. I see, I think we all do. You know, every few days, almost, there seems to be something in the legal press or on LinkedIn, somebody waxing lyrical about how awful the billable hour is, and so forth. I think it's completely the wrong question. If you go back to what I said before about framing pricing as a skill, what we say is that part of becoming confident and competent about pricing at a partner level is to expand their pricing vocabulary and their pricing repertoire. We have a very narrow repertoire when it comes to pricing at the moment, but that's simply a function of the fact that the professional services sector is extremely unsophisticated in its approach to pricing compared to just about every other part of the economy, from fast food to aviation, hospitality, FMCG, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, you name it. Everyone's smarter at pricing than we are collectively. So to talk, if you think in terms of a pricing vocabulary as representing a discrete basket or bag of pricing skills, techniques, and strategies, to me, it makes no sense to cast this discussion about the billable hour in binary terms of it's either good and we should have it, or it's bad and it should be chucked out completely. It should be part of that tool bag. It's like arbitrarily removing from a chef one ingredient in the pantry. Sure, that ingredient might not be ideal in a given dish, but it doesn't mean that it's pointless and shouldn't be there, because there are times when it's, if not ideal, it's the least worst alternative. So I just wish people would stop talking about let's get rid of the billable hour. I think the correct way to frame it is to say, let's give lawyers the tools to be able to talk about considerably more than simply the billable hour, but retain it as part of their repertoire.
And when you talk to firms, I imagine this is something that does come up again and again. I guess, where's your starting point, and how would you put it into the mix? How would you use that ingredient? And what's the pushback that you get from the firms that you talk to, if any?
I don't. In fact, they find it a revelation. They find it liberating to be able to talk about more things with their clients. The confidence grows, and they go, well, the way you described that and explained it, that's not difficult, and it isn't. But I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, so I now feel like I'm better equipped to have those kinds of conversations. So it's nothing but upside from the law firm's point of view. If you look at it, you asked about this sort of through the prism of the client perspective. it's not difficult to see why clients are deeply suspicious about the billable hour. I mean, talk about a conflict of interest. There is absolutely no incentive to be efficient. There is no incentive to invest in technology. In fact, firms are actually now asking us to help with the pricing of hybrid service delivery, which is part technology and part human, because they've realized that if you invest in a bit of kit that enables you to do something in 10% of the time that it used to do that you charge for, you've kind of broken your billable hour profitability model. So that has to be completely reinvented. But I have to be honest and say that clients, this probably will not be well received, but I call it how I see it. Clients are part of the problem. And there are a couple of reasons why. So many GCs were brought up in a private practice environment. So they take into the in-house world all the mindsets, predispositions, prejudices, and views that they did when they were in private practice. So it is entirely understandable that looking at it from the other side of the fence, they will have a deep suspicion of it. But although an increasing number, and to their very great credit, an increasing number are interested in learning more about what innovative firms are doing around pricing, there are others that either aren't interested or don't have the time. Added to that is the procurement function. The growth of procurement is something that law firms have been having to contend with for a long time. And you hit the nail on the head when you talked about comparative metrics. The only thing that procurement use or can find, by and large, to compare firms are hourly rates. Now, there's more to it than that they're also looking for, ESG credentials and lots of other things go into the scoring mix at a procurement level. But insofar as they're comparing on pricing, the only metric they've got are hourly rates. And so the client side is actually reinforcing the retention of hourly rates by making that the criteria by which law firms are judged. Hardly surprising that it's still around.
Mm. And you mentioned something there that I want to pick up on, which is the use of technology, because that for me is something that firms, we're going to see more and more of. What's your view? How are the smart firms going to tackle this problem, that they have all of this technology that they can now tap into that will make them much more efficient, which will mean that the lawyers will be focused on, the good stuff, the layer on top. Yep. That has to force a change in pricing, doesn't it?
There will become a breaking point. During the pandemic, we actually were invited by Kira to run a couple of global webinars in response to requests from law firms that had invested in technology and other labour-saving, kit, and we're suddenly realising, yes, we got this problem. Not only did we shelled out a capital expense on the item, but we've just reduced, 500 billable hours to 50 billable hours. That's not sustainable. So that has to be completely reframed around a value proposition. The traditional model which law firms have adopted of cost plus doesn't work where you've got a tech-enabled or tech-hybrid delivery model. So that's having to be completely reconceived. Can be done, but it's not something that's going to fix itself. The second part of technology, though, is specifically around pricing technology. So this is the means by which firms put pricing proposals together and monitor them and so on. Traditionally, the solutions available have been designed for finance-focused professionals. So the finance team, the commercial finance team, the analysts, the pricing specialists, which is great. But even in the largest firms in the world that have fabulous and well-resourced pricing teams, that teams like that still only have the ability to reach skin deep into the firm. They brought on all the major bids, pitches, tenders, panel renewals, major clients, key clients, and so forth. The other 95% of all pricing proposals in the firm are done by stressed, struggling partners. and there's still an awful lot of wandering over to the window, scratching the head for 5 minutes and going, it feels like 50,000. And so that's no way to run a business. And so one of the things that we realized as a company 5 years ago was that there was a piece of our offering to the market, and that was missing, and that was the technology. So we built our reputation on people and process. It was the technology component that was missing. And the light bulb went on after reading an article written by the CTO at one of the Magic Circle firms about the amount of technology they've got sitting on the shelves that are only used by a handful of people. He called it shelfware, which I thought summed it up nicely. So we've launched to the market our own pricing software, which is a global technology partner of Aderant and 3E. So we built it specifically for lawyers. I keep asking myself each day, what would have made my life easier in practice, and what's intuitive and blindingly easy to follow?
And obviously you've got your products. So, but in terms of, I guess my question is, what I'm hearing is that that's a technology that empowers lawyers to be better at pricing. Do you think that is the answer when pricing is going to become increasingly sophisticated? Or is the answer for law firms to actually put their hands up and say, you know what, this is complicated. We can't just say this is 5 hours plus, an extra one just in case. We really do need a team that takes charge of this and runs this for us, because actually it's not our skill set and we're better off being focused on what our skill set actually is.
It's a very good point. In fact, I'm often asked by firms that are looking to either create or reconfigure the pricing function within the firm, should pricing be centralized or decentralized? Should we take it off all our lawyers and just have a central department that does all the pricing? The other extreme, of course, is that there is no pricing function and partners just muddle along as best they can. Again, I don't think it's helpful to refer to that dilemma as a polarized dichotomy. Surely there's a solution that represents a mix of the two. And so firms that we see that are doing this really well are actually doing both. So they will have a great pricing team of really smart people, analysts. They bring various skill sets, their own negotiation skills and analytical skills and so forth. But as I said before, even the biggest firms in the world with the biggest pricing teams can only reach so far into the firm. They would have to scale it up by an order of magnitude to even get close to divesting partners of pricing. And even then, I don't personally believe it would work. And the reason why is because this is a relationship business. Clients expect to have the pricing conversation with the relationship partner, and much as they would prefer not to, partners also expect that they have to do it as part of their management of the relationship. I just cannot conceive of a world where a partner receives instructions on a large deal, a large piece of litigation, and when they are asked how much is it going to cost, they're told, nothing to do with me. I'll show you down the corridor to the pricing team. You have a chat with them. I just don't see us ever getting to that point. So it needs to be a combination of the two. Partners self-serving through a combination of skills development, competence and training, plus lawyer-centric technology, plus a high-level, high-operating pricing team dealing with the big, gnarly, complicated, high-value stuff.
I guess I've got two thoughts running around in my head. One is kind of playing devil's advocate. You could still have someone fronting the relationship and still have those conversations, but informed by something or someone sitting behind. I guess that's one of the thoughts that I've got, and it leads into my second and my question, I guess, that there must be increasingly a tension between those people who are pricing things on a cost plus basis and those people who have a better sense of value. And what does this transaction, what does this mean in terms of value for the client, and articulating that value? And that could be, more or less than the cost plus, I guess. So, do you see that tension, or are firms just not there yet, or is it,
No, really, really insightful question. I don't disagree with you at all when you say that is there room for partners having fronting the pricing conversation, but with support. I completely agree. It's a question of scale. So the pricing team, I can't see a pricing team ever growing to the point where literally every partner could just hit a red button and call for help on every pricing proposal. It's just impossible, I would suggest. That is why the technology, that is to say, the latest generation of pricing technology, like Virtual Pricing Director, actually amplifies the reach of the pricing team into the firm by using data, machine learning to, in part, replicate the support or assistance that the person in the pricing team would provide to the partner by surfacing that same information intelligently so that the partner can use it themselves. Would it be great to have the pricing director sitting next to every partner on every matter? Yes, but obviously that's impossible. So it's about using human and tech to reach scale. As far as the your second point goes, I think this comes back to governance. One of the things that we've encouraged firms to do is to actually introduce some governance around controls, I suppose. One of the things that we have seen is that there's a huge range in terms of pricing discretion. So in some firms, it's completely laissez-faire. It's the Wild West. Partners are just left to do what they like on the basis that they have the relationship and they would argue that they're the best judge of what the client will pay and won't pay and so forth. In other firms, it's locked down as tight as a drum. So partners have 3% discretion on headline rates and 3% write-off discretion at the end of the job. So somewhere in between those two extremes is the comfort zone for firms based on their culture.
What I'm hearing is that there are obviously lots of things at play here. So, some clients are more sophisticated than others. Some will understand. Some clients will be led by their procurement teams and therefore their hands will presumably be tied. And, they have to therefore find something that's measurable across. In your view, given what's happening in the world, and particularly I'm thinking about technology, I'm thinking about the fact that there is a recognition that, there are a place for human lawyers to be doing the sophisticated work, but actually a lot of the work that, previously would have been done by lawyers can be done by technology. That for me can only go in one way, which is towards a value-based model.
Yes.
And, my sense, and it's not my area of expertise, so it'd be interesting to hear what you think, but my sense is that that's still quite a long way away in the future, partly because of the billable hour and this holding on to the fact that, we're selling ourselves, we're selling the hours that we're putting in. Where do you see the future going?
There is no doubt that there is only one direction of travel, as you said, and that is that technology is going to play an increasing role in the delivery of services. And many would say that's a very good thing for clients because it helps to reduce cost. Many would say it's also very good for lawyers because they end up working only on high value, more cerebral, engaging and interesting stuff rather than more menial tasks that still need to be done and charged for. I would suggest that we are sort of in a transition period where everyone is figuring out what the right combination of those two actually is. But I do completely agree with you that the further we go down that track, the greater the imperative for firms to completely revisit the pricing paradigm. It's not completely broken yet, but it's not that far away from being completely broken. And so if we go back to pricing first principles, there are three fundamental paradigms: cost plus, which we all understand, work out what it costs to keep the lights on and add 50%. Market-driven pricing, which is my pricing is primarily determined by looking around and seeing what everyone else is doing and making sure that mine's there or thereabouts. And then the third one is value pricing. And I'll I'll explain what I mean by value pricing, because I think it's a term often abused and misunderstood. The first two are what the profession has done since time immemorial. So a combination of cost plus market driven. Value pricing, I mean, if you ask 30 people for a definition of value pricing, you'll get 100 different answers. So I don't profess that my framing of it is ideal, or certainly not the only one. But in my mind, it represents a close correlation between what the client is being asked to pay and the value that they perceive they are getting. Now, the reason why we don't like it, or many lawyers don't like it, is because it lacks specificity and rigor. It is a very subjective concept, because value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. So what's a lawyer supposed to do? Go to a client and say, how much do you think this is worth? And that's what I'll charge you. So this has just historically been all too hard. But there are ways around it, and it's not as difficult as it might seem. Like many things, once you know how, it looks easy. So lawyers should take heart from the fact that they don't need to keep resisting the trend. What they need to do is to learn to go with it and adapt to it and make it work for them.
And if you had to give some advice to firms listening, thinking, we can see this coming, we know we're not where we need to be, what advice would you give them to start to lean into the changes that are coming?
I suppose a couple of things. One is they need to be cognizant of the fact that some firms have made a lot of progress in the space, much more than others. What that means is that clients, particularly clients that operate panels and deal with multiple firms, are already beginning to experience quite different commercial offerings from firms. So those that are bringing a sophisticated approach to the pricing conversation will be catching the attention of the clients. And it's inevitable, I suppose, that some are going to get left behind. So, we lawyers don't like to be first cab off the rank, but we don't like to be third or fourth either. So they need to be watching their rear view mirror. The second thing is, it's a mistake to view getting better at pricing as simply a professional development exercise. We'll get our lawyers into a room, someone can talk to them about pricing for a couple of hours, pick up a couple of tips, and away they go, sorted. That is a deeply flawed perspective, because what you're really asking lawyers to do is completely reconceive the way that they value the work that they're doing for the clients, and in turn how they monetize that work. Try getting a 30-year partner in the room and change the habits of a lifetime in 2 hours. It's just absurd. So it needs to be viewed as a transformation exercise, not a professional development or CPD, CLE exercise. And that in turn means there has to be a willingness to address all the pain points, which is the people, process, and technology element. Anything less than that is, well, not a guaranteed failure, but it's going to disappoint.
Richard, it's been so fascinating talking to you, and I could have 101 other questions. Maybe we can do a part 2, but thank you
Please.
so much for your time. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire. If you can put up with listening to me for another half an hour, I would be delighted to come back.
That was Claire talking to Richard Burcher, chairman of Validatum. Claire's with me now. What are your reflections on that conversation, Claire?
I think one of the things that paused me in my tracks a little bit was this idea of the billable hour being quite a divisive black or white issue. And it was interesting to hear Richard say that for him, it's not, do we keep it, do we get rid, but, how can we make it work as part of the bigger whole? And I think often when people talk about the billable hour, there is a lot of hate. It's interesting perhaps to look at it from the perspective of, rather than get rid of the billable hour, perhaps what we need to be doing is thinking about how we can reduce its impact rather than getting rid of it altogether.
Yeah, he kind of framed it in terms of it being just part of the repertoire of pricing, which I thought was was a nice way of putting it. You know, it's almost like it's one of the options in the pricing kit bag, as it were.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that, and particularly reflecting on my time within law firms and seeing what, you know, went out to clients in terms of the different pricing options that are available. I think that lawyers actually do recognise that the billable hour is just a starting point and just one of many ways that fees can be agreed. I think for me, and it's one of the things that we didn't really talk about in this conversation, but, you know, the idea of it has a value outside of the firm, but it also has a value inside of the firm. And I wonder, perhaps should be one of the metrics that is used internally, but I wonder whether part of the problem is it becomes, you know, the main metric, which is behind so much of the discussion, I think, around the billable hour.
And he was always also quite challenging when he said that clients are part of the problem as well, in the sense of so many clients were formerly in private practice and have an expectation of, you know, being charged on an hourly basis or paying on an hourly basis, I should say. Yeah,
no, that was interesting. And I think, you know, an education piece to be had on both sides. And I wonder whether there's an element in there of better the devil you know, that old phrase of, you know, you're not going to get sacked for hiring Linklaters, and perhaps similarly with pricing, you know, where you're stepping into an area which is perhaps a little bit outside of your comfort zone. The billable hour is an easy metric and one where, you know, you at least can point to some degree of value in return.
So a great start to our debate, I thought, Claire. Thanks ever so much for talking with Richard.
Thanks, Oliver.
Look out for the next episode of The Lawyer's Coach, where we have another guest helping us delve more deeply into the debate around the billable hour.
Lawyer's Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyer's Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyer's Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.